The crackling voice through the radio speaker dies mid-sentence, and the operations room falls into a silence so complete that Lieutenant Colonel Frank Halloran can hear his own heartbeat pulsing in his ears. He leans forward over the plotting table, one hand flat against the acetate overlay, marked with red grease pencil tracks, the other pressing the headset tighter against his skull, as if proximity alone might resurrect the lost transmission. Nothing. Just the empty hiss of static that sounds like wind over a grave. Sergeant Willis at the radio console adjusts dials with methodical precision, his jaw working a piece of gum that has long since lost its flavour, eyes fixed on the glowing tubes and flickering needles that refuse to tell him what he needs to know. The clock on the wall reads 0847 hours, and outside the Quonset hut, rain hammers against corrugated steel in rhythmic waves that match the tremor starting somewhere deep in Halloran's chest. The reconnaissance Mosquito, call sign Able 7, was 43 minutes into a photographic sweep of the rail yards east of Cologne when the pilot's voice cut off between one word and the next. Not a scream, not an explosion heard through the microphone, just cessation. One moment, Flight Lieutenant Davies was calmly reporting cloud cover at 8,000 feet and visibility good enough to get the pictures they needed. The next there was nothing but the ambient wash of electromagnetic noise that fills the spaces between human voices. Halloran has heard this silence before, 3 times in 14 months, and each time it has meant the same thing. Somewhere over the patchwork fields and dark forests of occupied Europe, an aircraft and its crew have transitioned from the world of the living into something else, some intermediate state between present and past tense that will not resolve itself until long after this moment, if ever. He straightens slowly, feeling the weight of command settle across his shoulders like a physical burden, and meets the eyes of Captain Reeves, who stands by the weather map with a clipboard pressed against his chest like a shield. Reeves is young, 24, and still believes that following procedure will somehow protect him from the chaos that lurks at the edges of every operation. The captain opens his mouth to speak, but Halloran raises one hand, palm out, needing another moment before the machinery of response begins to turn. Through the window he can see the flight line, where ground crews work on bombers that will lift into the murk at 1400 hours, their shapes indistinct through the rain-streaked glass, and he thinks about Davies and his navigator Harding crammed into that wooden aircraft built for speed rather than protection. 2 men in a machine held together with glue and canvas, and the absolute faith that today would not be the day. Willis tries another frequency, his fingers dancing across the controls with practiced efficiency, calling the lost aircraft with the kind of steady professionalism that comes from refusing to acknowledge what everyone in the room already knows. Able 7. Able 7. This is Bulldog Actual. Radio check. Over. The words disappear into the static like stones thrown into deep water. Halloran walks to the large-scale map pinned to the wall, tracing with his eyes the route marked in blue, the departure from base, the ingress corridor chosen for minimal flak exposure, the target area, the planned egress that should have brought them back over friendly territory by 0930. His finger stops at the last reported position, a coordinate that now represents the edge of knowledge, the place where certainty ends and conjecture begins. The room smells of cigarette smoke and damp wool, and the particular metallic tang of electronics pushed hard for too many hours without rest. Someone has made coffee, bad coffee, the kind that tastes like it was brewed in a tin can, and the pot sits on a hot plate in the corner, sending up thin wisps of steam. Halloran pours himself a cup without tasting it, the heat in his hands serving mainly to remind him that he is still here, still breathing, still responsible for making decisions that will ripple outward in ways he cannot fully predict. The coffee is terrible, but he drinks it anyway because he needs something to do with his body, while his mind cycles through the options, each one worse than the last. Reeves clears his throat, and Halloran gives him a nod, permission to speak. "Sir, should we initiate search and rescue protocol?" The question hangs in the air between them, perfectly reasonable on its surface, concealing the brutal arithmetic that governs such decisions. Halloran knows the numbers by heart, because he has run them before. The chance of survivors, if the aircraft went down over land versus water, the probability of evasion if they made it out alive, the risk-to-reward ratio of sending more aircraft into the same airspace where something just killed or captured Able 7. He knows that there are resistance networks in Belgium and France who might shelter downed airmen, knows that there are also German troops who would very much like to interrogate anyone who has just photographed their rail infrastructure, knows that every minute spent deciding is a minute those two men do not have. "What's the weather over the target area?" Halloran asks, though he already knows the answer because he approved the mission based on the morning forecast. Reeves glances at his clipboard, a nervous gesture. Ceiling at 6,000 feet, visibility 5 miles, improving. The kind of conditions that make photographic reconnaissance possible, that also make fighter interception entirely feasible. Halloran sets his coffee cup down on the plotting table, where it leaves a wet ring on the acetate, another mark to add to the constellation of stains and notations that map the war's progress. He thinks about Davies, whom he has known for 8 months, a calm man with steady hands and a wife in Sussex who sends him letters that smell faintly of lavender. He thinks about Harding, the navigator, barely 21, who plays chess in the mess hall and always loses because he takes too many risks. Willis continues his radio calls, methodical, patient, each one a small act of defiance against the silence. The sergeant has been doing this job since North Africa, has seen his share of aircraft fail to return, and somewhere along the way he learned that you keep calling until someone tells you to stop, that you maintain the fiction of possible contact because the alternative is acceptance, and acceptance is a kind of betrayal. Halloran respects this, even as he knows it changes nothing. The German radar network is extensive, the fighter response time measured in minutes, and a lone reconnaissance aircraft, no matter how fast, no matter how well flown, is always vulnerable in that moment when it must fly straight and level to get the photographs that justify its presence over enemy territory. He pulls out a chair and sits down heavily, the metal frame creaking under his weight, and spreads both hands flat on the table's surface. His wedding ring catches the overhead light, a small golden circle that connects him to a life that exists in parallel to this one, a life where his wife Margaret sleeps in their bed in Lincolnshire, and their daughter practices piano, and the war is something that happens to other people. But here now, in this room that smells of wet wool and electricity, he is responsible for 2 men whose status has shifted from present to absent, and he must decide how much risk he is willing to accept in pursuit of their return. The brutal calculus of command, 2 lives already in jeopardy. How many more should he wager on the possibility of recovery? "Get me Group HQ," he says to Willis, who nods and begins working the radio, switching frequencies with the ease of long practice. While they wait for the connection, Halloran studies the map again, trying to read between the lines of blue and red, trying to extrapolate from known facts to hidden truth. The last position report put Able 7 on approach to the target, descending through 8,000 feet for the photo run. Standard procedure. Davies would have armed his cameras, adjusted his airspeed, focused all his attention on the equipment that represented the whole purpose of the mission. Harding would have been watching the sky, looking for the dark specks that might resolve into enemy fighters, calling out positions and distances. And then what? Mechanical failure? Anti-aircraft fire? Fighters they never saw until too late? The Mosquito is a good aircraft, fast and agile, but it is also made primarily of wood and contains no armor to speak of, no defensive armament beyond speed and the pilot's skill. The radio crackles, and a voice from Group comes through, tinny and compressed, but recognizable. Major Caldwell, the operations officer, a man who has been fighting this war from behind a desk for so long that he sometimes forgets what it feels like to sit in a cockpit with the throttles pushed forward and the earth falling away beneath you. Halloran gives him the facts. mission type, aircraft, crew, last known position, loss of contact. He keeps his voice flat, professional, refusing to let emotion colour the transmission, because that is how you survive this job, by treating each loss as a data point rather than a tragedy. Caldwell asks the expected questions, and Halloran provides the expected answers, and together they perform the ritual that transforms uncertainty into official acknowledgement. Missing, not yet presumed, status pending. When the conversation ends, Halloran finds himself staring at the clock, watching the second hand sweep through its endless circle, each rotation marking time that Davies and Harding do not have. If they crashed, if they survived the impact, if they managed to get clear of the wreckage, if they can evade immediate capture. So many conditionals stacked one atop another until the probability of success becomes vanishingly small. But not zero. Never quite zero. And that is the cruelty of hope, that it refuses to die even when mathematics suggests it should. He has seen men walk out of occupied Europe weeks or months after being shot down, has shaken their hands and listened to their stories, and understood that miracles, while rare, are not impossible. He has also filled out the forms that begin with regret to inform you, has watched those forms carried away to be filed in cabinets that grow fuller with each passing month. Outside, the rain has intensified, turning the world beyond the windows into a grey blur, punctuated by the dark shapes of aircraft and buildings. The mission boards on the far wall show the afternoon's scheduled operations, bomber raids on industrial targets, fighter sweeps, all proceeding according to plan, while somewhere Able 7 exists in a state of quantum uncertainty, both alive and dead, until observation collapses the probability wave. Halloran finds this thought unhelpful and pushes it away, focusing instead on the concrete decisions he must make. Search and rescue means reconnaissance, means sending more aircraft into harm's way, means risking a wider exposure of the very mission they were trying to keep covert. Intelligence value versus crew recovery. The photographs Davies was supposed to bring back could reveal German preparations for the winter offensive everyone knows is coming, could save lives by the hundreds or thousands if they show what needs to be shown. But if Davies is alive somewhere in occupied territory, struggling to evade capture, then time is the most precious resource, and it is bleeding away with every passing minute. Sir, Reeves again, always Reeves, the young officer who needs to fill silences with words. The standing orders say we should... Halloran cuts him off with a look. I know what the standing orders say, Captain. I wrote half of them. The younger man flushes and steps back, wounded, and Halloran immediately regrets the harshness, but does not apologize because apology would suggest uncertainty, and uncertainty is a luxury he cannot afford. He stands and walks to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass, feeling the vibration of rain impact travel through the material into his skull. Beyond the flight line he can see the edge of the woods, where deer sometimes appear at dawn, can see the distant spire of the village church rising above the trees. Normal life, continuing in parallel, indifferent to the small catastrophe unfolding here. Willis has returned to his radio watch, cycling through frequencies in a pattern designed to maximize the chance of contact while minimizing the risk of direction finding by German listening posts. The sergeant's face shows nothing, perfect professional detachment, but Halloran knows that beneath the surface Willis carries his own catalogue of lost voices, his own gallery of faces that no longer answer when called. The radio operator's job is perhaps the cruelest in the squadron, because they are the last to hear each doomed crew, the ones who maintain connection right up to the moment when connection fails, and then they must sit at their console and continue working as if nothing has changed, as if the absence in the headphones is merely a technical problem rather than an ontological shift. The phone on the wall rings, and Reeves answers it, listens, hangs up, turns to Halloran with an expression that manages to combine hope and dread in equal measure. Sir, the Observer Corps reports a possible sighting. Aircraft matching Able 7's description, low altitude, approximately 20 miles south of the last known position, heading west. Halloran's pulse quickens, despite his conscious effort to remain calm. West, toward home, trying to get back. He crosses to the map, measures distances with dividers, calculates flight times and fuel states in his head. 20 miles south, heading west, either limping home damaged or taking evasive action after an encounter. Either way, alive, or at least airborne, still in the fight. "When was the sighting?" he asks, and Reeves checks his notes. 7 minutes ago, sir." 7 minutes, a lifetime at combat speed, enough time to cross 20 miles of hostile territory, or enough time to be shot down 3 times over. Halloran looks at the map, at the patchwork of friendly and enemy territory marked in green and red, at the grey zone between where allegiances shift like sand and survival depends on luck and timing and the kindness of strangers who have no reason to be kind. If Davies is trying to make it back, if he is flying low to avoid radar, if he is nursing a damaged aircraft across occupied Belgium, then he needs silence, needs clear airspace, needs every advantage that Halloran can give him. But sending search aircraft means potentially drawing attention to Davies's position, means putting more assets at risk in an area where something has already gone badly wrong. "Contact Fighter Command," Halloran orders. "Request air cover over the Channel approaches, effective immediately, and get me the duty officer at Air Sea Rescue." Reeves nods and moves to the telephone, and Halloran returns his attention to the map, trying to think like Davies, trying to imagine what he would do with a damaged aircraft and hostile fighters potentially in pursuit and fuel running low, and the cold grey North Sea waiting between him and home. The Mosquito's range is good, but not infinite, and every mile flown at low altitude, at high speed, at combat power, burns through the tanks faster than planned. He tries to remember the takeoff time, the fuel load, the expected consumption rate, building a mental model of what is possible and what is not, what falls within the envelope of survivability and what does not. The room settles into a tense rhythm, people moving with purpose, voices low, everyone focused on their individual tasks while contributing to the collective effort of pulling information from the chaos. Willis maintains his radio watch. Reeves works the phone, talking to Fighter Command, to Air Sea Rescue, to anyone who might have information or resources to contribute. Halloran stands at the map like a general surveying a battlefield, though the battlefield exists in 4 dimensions, and the enemy is time as much as German guns. The rain continues its assault on the roof, a constant drumming that forms a soundtrack to the unfolding crisis, and somewhere in the back of his mind, Halloran registers the absurdity of it all, that 2 men's lives hang in balance while nature proceeds with absolute indifference, while water falls from sky to earth in patterns established long before humans learned to fly, and will continue long after the last aircraft has fallen. Another call comes through, this time from a radar station on the coast. Aircraft, single, low altitude, crossing into friendly airspace. Could be Able 7, but identification uncertain due to altitude and weather. Halloran feels something loosen in his chest, a tension he had not fully acknowledged until now, and he realizes that he has been holding his breath, that his hands have formed fists without his conscious direction. He forces himself to relax, to maintain the professional distance that separates effective command from emotional paralysis, but he cannot entirely suppress the hope that rises like water through sand. Coming home. Maybe, possibly. The words carry enough uncertainty to prevent celebration, but enough promise to keep him focused. "Vector him to base," he tells Reeves, "alert crash crews and medical, and get Sergeant Harris down to the flight line with his camera. If that aircraft is damaged, I want documentation before anyone touches it." The order flows from his mouth automatically, the product of training and experience, his mind already moving ahead to the next decisions, the next challenges. If Davies brings back the aircraft and the photographs, if he has succeeded despite everything, then the intelligence value increases exponentially, and Halloran will need to brief group immediately, will need to get the film processed and analysed, will need to justify why he sent a solo reconnaissance mission into an area that subsequently proved hostile. If Davies brings back only himself and his navigator, if the aircraft is too damaged to carry useful photographs, then the mission will be recorded as a failure, and Halloran will need to decide whether to try again, whether to risk more crews in pursuit of the same intelligence. But these are future problems, luxuries of a sort, because they assume Davies succeeds in reaching base, in putting the aircraft down in one piece, in surviving the next 20 minutes of flight over territory where German fighters still prowl and British gunners, nervous and trigger-happy, might not distinguish friend from foe until too late. Halloran has seen friendly fire before, has watched aircraft destroyed by their own side, and he knows that coming home is sometimes the most dangerous part of any mission, that the moment when you think you are safe is precisely when fate tends to strike. Willis suddenly stiffens at his console, pressing one earphone harder against his head, his free hand raising to signal for silence. The room freezes, every person turning to watch the sergeant, to wait for whatever message is coming through. "Sir," Willis says, his voice carefully neutral, "I have Able 7 on emergency frequency, signal weak but readable." And then, after a pause that seems to last for hours but probably spans only seconds, he's requesting immediate landing clearance, says he has battle damage and limited control. Halloran is moving before Willis finishes speaking, crossing to the radio console, taking a headset, listening to the crackle and hiss that resolves into Davies's voice, strained and distant, but unmistakably alive. The pilot is reporting hydraulic failure, port engine running rough, partial aileron control only, requesting straight-in approach with emergency equipment standing by. His tone is professional, almost conversational, the studied calm of a man who has accepted that he is in trouble and is now focused entirely on the problem of survival. Halloran recognizes this tone because he has used it himself, has felt the strange clarity that comes when fear gives way to purpose, when the complexity of survival narrows to a series of immediate tasks that must be accomplished in sequence. "Able 7, this is Bulldog Actual," Halloran says into the microphone, his voice steady despite the adrenaline singing through his veins. "You are cleared for immediate landing runway 27. Emergency equipment is standing by. Wind is 240 at 15, gusting 22. Altimeter 29992. He pauses, then adds, "Good to hear your voice, Jeff." A small violation of radio protocol, but necessary. A human connection across the electromagnetic distance. A reminder that this is not merely aircraft and control tower, but men who know each other, who have shared drinks and stories, and the peculiar intimacy of shared danger. Davies acknowledges briefly, already focused on the approach, and Halloran hands the headset back to Willis, hurrying toward the door, grabbing his coat from its hook, ignoring Reeves, who calls after him with some question that can wait. Outside, the rain hits him like a physical force, cold water running down his face, soaking through his cap, and he breaks into a run toward the flight line, his boots splashing through puddles, his breath coming in gasps. Around him, the base has come alive with the controlled urgency of emergency response. Fire trucks rolling toward the runway, ambulances positioning themselves downwind of the approach path, ground crew appearing from various buildings and converging on the designated emergency area. Everyone has a role to play. Everyone knows the choreography, and Halloran finds himself swept up in the collective movement toward the crisis point. He reaches the control tower, takes the stairs 2 at a time, emerges onto the upper level where the duty officer and his assistants monitor the approach through rain-streaked windows. Someone hands him binoculars and he raises them, scanning the grey-white murk to the east, looking for the dark speck that will resolve into an aircraft, into Davies and Harding, into the physical manifestation of what has until now existed only as coordinates on a map and words through a radio. The wind buffets the tower, rain drumming against the glass, and Halloran feels the structure sway slightly beneath him, a reminder that everything built by humans is temporary, vulnerable, subject to forces beyond control. Then he sees it, a shape emerging from the cloud base, too low, descending at an angle that suggests struggle rather than control. The mosquito appears and disappears in the rain, a ghost made solid, trailing thin smoke from one engine, the wooden airframe showing dark stains that might be oil or hydraulic fluid or something worse. Davies is fighting the aircraft, that much is obvious even from this distance, the wings rocking slightly as he tries to maintain alignment with the runway, the nose tracking left and right in small corrections that reveal the extent of his control problems. Halloran watches through the binoculars, his hands steady now, his breathing slow, all fear transmuted into focus, because there is nothing he can do to help except watch and wait and be present for whatever comes next. The Mosquito crosses the perimeter fence at an altitude that makes Halloran's stomach tighten, so low that he can see the wheels hanging in their wells, can see the propellers still turning, though the port engine is clearly struggling. Davies holds the approach, holds it, the aircraft seeming to float above the runway in defiance of physics and probability. And then the wheels touch concrete, with a screech that Halloran can hear even through the tower's closed windows, a sound of rubber meeting ground at something close to the edge of structural tolerance. The tail comes down hard, the aircraft bouncing once, settling, rolling out with emergency vehicles in pursuit, and even before it stops completely, Halloran can see the ground crew running toward it, fire extinguishers at the ready, medical personnel close behind. He is running again, down the stairs, across the tarmac, his coat flapping behind him like a cape, rain forgotten, conscious only of the need to reach the aircraft, to see with his own eyes what has returned to him. The Mosquito sits skewed on the runway, port propeller windmilling to a stop, the wooden skin showing impact damage along the fuselage, and what looks like cannon strikes in the port wing. Fuel is streaming from a ruptured tank, the ground crew shouting warnings, positioning fire trucks, deploying foam. The canopy opens, and Davies emerges first, his face white beneath his leather helmet, his movements stiff as he climbs down onto the wing. Harding follows, slower, one arm held against his body, blood visible on his flight suit. Halloran reaches them as medical personnel arrive, and Davies looks at him with eyes that have seen something fundamental, something that has changed him in ways that will not become apparent for hours or days or perhaps ever. "Got the pictures, sir," Davies says, his voice hoarse, his hands shaking now that the immediate crisis has passed. "Fighters jumped us over the target, thought we were done, but Harding got us coordinates for a valley run and we went in under the weather. They couldn't follow, not at that altitude, not in that terrain." He pauses, swaying slightly, and Halloran grabs his arm to steady him. "Camera work the whole time. Whatever you need, it's on the film." Harding is being helped away by medical staff, their hands gentle on his injured arm, and Halloran watches them go, watches the ambulance doors close, watches the vehicle drive away through rain that shows no sign of stopping. Around him, the fire crews are dousing the aircraft with foam, turning the Mosquito into a ghost ship, all its lines and angles obscured by white chemical snow. The smell is overwhelming, acrid and chemical, cutting through even the rain, and Halloran finds himself breathing through his mouth to avoid it. "Well done," he tells Davies, and means it, knows that this simple phrase carries weight, because it comes from someone who understands what it cost to get here, what it took to keep flying when every instinct screamed to bail out, to save yourself, to abandon the mission in favor of survival. Davies nods once, sharply, then allows himself to be led away toward the medical tent, and Halloran is left standing in the rain, watching ground crews swarm over the damaged aircraft, watching them extract the camera, watching Sergeant Harris already documenting the damage with his own camera, creating the visual record that will become part of the mission file. The rain falls and the wind blows, and the war continues in all its terrible momentum. But, for this moment, in this place, 2 men have returned who might have been lost, have brought with them information that might save other lives, might tip some small balance in the endless calculation of advantage and attrition. Halloran turns back toward the operations room, walking slowly now, feeling exhaustion settle into his bones, feeling the weight of the decision he made to wait, to not send search aircraft, to trust that Davies would find his own way home. It could have ended differently. It almost certainly should have ended differently, given the odds, given the hostile environment, given the damage the aircraft sustained. But it did not, and Halloran must find a way to process this, to file it away with all the other decisions that form the bedrock of his command, the ones that saved lives and the ones that did not. Back in the operations room, the tension has dissolved into something like relief, people moving with less urgency now, voices rising to normal conversational levels. Someone even laughing at something, Willis says, though Halloran does not hear the joke. He removes his soaked coat, hangs it back on its hook where it drips onto the floor, forming a dark puddle, and approaches the plotting table where the mission track still shows in blue grease pencil, still terminates at the point where communication was lost. He picks up a rag and wipes the acetate clean, erasing the track, erasing the uncertainty, preparing the table for the next mission, the next crisis, the next moment when someone under his command will fly into danger, and he will wait here, in this room, wondering whether they will return. Reeves appears beside him with a clipboard, already asking about the debrief schedule, about the film processing priority, about a dozen administrative details that must be resolved before the day can end. Halloran answers automatically, his mind elsewhere, part of him still standing on the runway watching that damaged aircraft emerge from the murk, part of him still listening to Davies's voice cutting in and out through static, part of him inhabiting all the parallel futures that did not occur, all the versions of today where Able 7 never came home, where he filled out those other forms, where he wrote those other letters. But this is not that day, not yet, and he allows himself a moment of gratitude for this reprieve, this temporary victory against odds that never favour survival. The clock shows 10:34 hours, and the afternoon mission board is already filling with names and aircraft assignments, the machinery of war grinding forward without pause, without reflection, with the remorseless efficiency of systems built to consume men and material in pursuit of objectives that shift and evolve, but never quite resolve. Halloran pours himself another cup of terrible coffee, adds too much sugar, drinks it standing at the window watching the rain begin to slacken, watching visibility improve, watching the clouds lift slightly as the weather pattern that has dominated the morning finally begins to break. By 1400 hours the bombers will launch, will climb through the overcast, will form their formations and set course for targets deep in occupied territory, and he will stand here plotting their progress, monitoring their communications, waiting for them to return. Some will not. The mathematics are inexorable, but some will, and that tension between loss and recovery, between mission success and crew survival, forms the essential fabric of his existence. He thinks about Davies in the medical tent, about Harding being treated for what appears to be a shoulder wound, about the photographs they brought back at such cost, and wonders what those images will show, what intelligence they will yield, whether the risk was justified by the result. But these are not really his questions to answer. His job is narrower, more immediate, to send men into harm's way when ordered, to do everything possible to bring them home, to make decisions in the face of incomplete information and accept the consequences of those decisions without the luxury of paralysis or regret. He has done this job for 14 months, has watched the roster of missing and killed in action grow steadily longer, has written so many letters that the words have begun to feel hollow, their meaning eroded by repetition. But today is not that day. Today Davies and Harding walked away from an aircraft that should have been their coffin, walked away because Davies kept flying and Harding kept navigating, and together they made decisions that balanced risk against survival in ways that Halloran, sitting safely in his operations room, could never fully understand. There is something almost sacred in this, in the competence of trained men under pressure, in their refusal to quit even when quitting would have been entirely rational. It is not heroism exactly, not the kind that appears in propaganda films or citation language, but something quieter and more fundamental, the simple determination to complete the task, to see it through, to not let down the people who depend on you. This is what holds the whole fragile structure together, Halloran thinks, this web of obligation and competence and collective purpose that connects each person in this base to every other, that transforms individuals into a weapon system capable of projecting force across hundreds of miles. Outside, the rain has stopped entirely, leaving behind a world washed clean, the air sharp and cold and smelling of wet earth. The clouds are breaking up, patches of pale blue showing between grey masses, the promise of better weather by afternoon. Halloran watches ground crew tow the damaged Mosquito away from the runway, watches it disappear into a hangar where technicians will assess whether it can be repaired or whether its usefulness has ended, whether the wood and metal and glue that carried Davies home can be made to fly again, or whether it has given all it has to give. There is a metaphor in this, something about resilience and breaking points and the limits of what can be fixed, but Halloran is too tired to pursue it, content instead to stand at the window and watch the base continue its rhythms, watch men and machines move through their appointed tasks, watch the war continue in all its terrible banality. Willis has finally stopped his radio watch, has logged the last transmission from Able 7, has moved on to monitoring other frequencies, other aircraft, other missions in progress. The sergeant catches Halloran's eye and nods once, a gesture of acknowledgement that requires no words, and Halloran nods back, recognizing in this moment the bond that connects them, the shared knowledge of what it means to wait for men who may not return, to be the voice in the darkness that guides them home. There are no medals for this, no citations or commendations, just the slow accumulation of experience and responsibility that weighs on your shoulders like stones in a sack, each one added so gradually that you do not notice until one day you try to straighten up and cannot quite manage it. The afternoon stretches ahead, full of briefings and mission planning, and the thousand small decisions that constitute command. But for now, Halloran allows himself this pause, this moment of standing at the window and watching clouds move across the sky, watching light and shadow play across the hangars and runways and distant trees. He thinks about his wife and daughter, about the life he left behind when he volunteered for this posting, about the letters he writes every week trying to explain what cannot be explained, what exists beyond the reach of words. He thinks about Davies and Harding and all the other men who fly into danger at his command, who trust him to make good decisions, who have no choice but to believe that their lives matter to someone, that they are not merely pieces on a board to be sacrificed in pursuit of larger goals. The truth, which Halloran acknowledges only in moments like this, is that he cannot protect them, cannot guarantee their survival, cannot do more than create conditions that favour success and hope that competence and luck will be sufficient. This is the burden of command, this knowledge that you will order men into situations where they may die, that you will do so repeatedly, that you will watch some of them fail to return, and you will continue anyway because stopping is not an option, because the war will not end, simply because you find it unbearable. So you bear it. You find ways to compartmentalize, to function despite the weight, to maintain the professional distance that allows you to see men as resources rather than as sons and husbands and fathers. And then, in moments like this, when the immediate crisis has passed, that distance collapses, and you remember that Davies has a wife who smells of lavender, and Harding plays chess in the mess hall, and the weight becomes almost unbearable, but only almost. Halloran finishes his coffee, sets the cup down, straightens his shoulders, and turns back to the plotting table where Reeves is already marking up the afternoon mission tracks, where the machinery of war demands his attention, where decisions must be made, and orders must be given, and the endless cycle must continue until someone, somewhere, decides that it has all been enough. Until then, he will stand in this room, will monitor the radios, will watch the clock, will wait for voices that may or may not return, and he will do it with the same professional competence that defines every other aspect of his service, because this is what is required, because 2 men came home today who might not have, because somewhere in the cold mathematics of attrition there are small victories worth acknowledging, worth remembering, worth carrying forward into whatever comes next. The light through the windows shifts as the sun finds gaps in the cloud cover, sending shafts of pale gold across the operations room, illuminating dust motes that dance in the air like tiny stars. Halloran watches them for a moment, these insignificant particles caught in currents they cannot control, and finds in their movement something like grace, something that reminds him that beauty persists even in the midst of organized violence, that the world continues to offer small moments of transcendence if you have eyes to see them. Then the moment passes, the light shifts, and he is back to work, back to the endless present tense of command, back to the weight and the responsibility and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities for things to go catastrophically wrong. But today, in this moment, his Recon plane did not vanish. It returned, damaged but intact, carrying with it 2 men who deserved to make it home, and somehow did. And that will have to be enough, because enough is all you ever get in war, and even that comes with no guarantees.